You think you know everything about John Singleton's groundbreaking 1991 masterpiece? Think again. From actors who were actually living their characters' realities, to bizarre on-set incidents involving real gang threats, helicopter sound problems, and age gaps that will blow your mind, Boyz in the Hood hide secrets that are stranger than fiction. These behind-the-scenes revelations will forever change how you watch this iconic film. Fact 1. The father was only 7 years older than his son. When you watch Boyz in the Hood, you see Lawrence Fishburne as the wise, experienced father figure Furious Styles, guiding his teenage son Trey through the dangers of South Central Los Angeles. What makes this performance even more remarkable is that Fishburne was only 7 years older than Cuba Gooding Jr., who played his son, when they filmed the movie in 1990. This age gap becomes even more mind-bending when you consider the characters they're playing. Furious is supposed to be a mature adult who had his son as a young man and has spent years learning hard lessons about life in the hood. Meanwhile, Trey is a 17-year-old high school student just figuring out his place in the world. The fact that the actors portraying this father-son relationship were practically peers in real life makes Fishburne's authoritative, paternal performance all the more impressive. Fishburne was 29 years old during filming, while Gooding Jr. was 22. In many scenes, you can see Fishburne delivering life lessons and tough love to his on-screen son with such conviction that you'd never guess they could have been college roommates in real life. The 7-year age difference meant that Fishburne had to rely entirely on his acting skills and presence to create the generational gap that the story required. This casting choice wasn't unusual for the film industry, but it highlights just how much movie magic goes into creating believable family relationships on screen. Director John Singleton was focused on finding the right actors for each role rather than worrying about realistic age gaps, and his instincts paid off. Fishburne's commanding performance as Furious became one of the most memorable father figures in cinema, proving that sometimes the best casting decisions are the ones that look weird on paper but work perfectly on screen. The age similarity between the actors actually makes their scenes together more fascinating to watch, knowing that they were essentially contemporaries playing characters from different generations. Fact 2. The mother was barely older than her sons. The casting choices in Boyz in the Hood created another bizarre age situation that most viewers never notice while watching the film. Tyra Farrell, who played Brenda Baker, the exhausted single mother trying to raise her two very different sons in South Central Los Angeles, was only 7 years older than both Ice Cube and Morris Chestnut, the actors who played her children Doughboy and Ricky. This means that when the cameras rolled in 1990, Farrell was essentially playing the mother of two men who were practically her peers in real life. Ice Cube was 21 years old during filming. Morris Chestnut was 22. And Tyra Farrell was 28. In the story, Brenda is supposed to be a woman who had her children when she was young and has spent years dealing with the stress of raising them in a dangerous neighborhood, but the actual age gap between the actors made this family dynamic even more compressed than the script suggested. What makes this casting even more interesting is how convincingly Farrell pulled off playing their worn-down mother. In several key scenes, she has to discipline Ice Cube's character Doughboy, telling him he's just like his father and will never amount to anything, while also showing favoritism toward Morris Chestnut's character Ricky, who she sees as her ticket out of poverty through his football talents. The emotional weight she brings to these moments is remarkable considering she was close enough in age to her on-screen sons that they could have all been siblings in real life. Farrell had to rely on her acting ability and the costume and makeup departments to create the visual and emotional distance needed to sell the mother-son relationships. Her performance required her to embody the exhaustion and frustration of a woman who had been worn down by years of struggling to keep her family together, all while being young enough that she and her co-stars could have been classmates just a few years earlier. Fact 3. Chris's wheelchair wasn't acting. One of the most powerful aspects of Boyz in the Hood is how it shows the real consequences of street violence, and nowhere is this more authentic than with the character of Chris, played by Reg Green. In the film, Chris is shown as one of Doughboy's friends, who uses a wheelchair after being shot and paralyzed. But what audiences didn't know was that Green wasn't acting when it came to his disability. he was actually paralyzed from the waist down in real life. Green's tragic story mirrors the violence depicted in the movie in a heartbreaking way. When he was just 6 years old, living in Richmond, California, he became an innocent victim of gun violence during a dispute between two neighbors. One man used him as a human shield while another man shot at him, and the bullet struck Green, leaving him paralyzed for life. This real-life trauma happened years before he was cast in the film, making his portrayal of a shooting victim incredibly authentic and personal. The casting of Green wasn't just about finding someone who could play the role convincingly. It was about bringing genuine lived experience to a character whose situation represented the harsh realities that many young people in communities like South Central Los Angeles faced every day. Green had already been working as a professional actor since age 13, appearing in television shows like Different Strokes, Highway to Heaven, and After MASH before landing his role in Boyz in the Hood. What makes Green's story even more remarkable is that just 2 hours after he was shot, his father died from a drug overdose, leaving him to cope with both his life-changing injury and the loss of his parent. Despite these overwhelming challenges, Green channeled his experiences into his acting career and later became a motivational speaker, using his story to help educate and inspire young people about the consequences of violence and the importance of making positive choices. Fact 4. Gang members threatened to kill Ice Cube. Filming Boyz in the Hood in the actual streets of South Central Los Angeles brought an unexpected and dangerous level of realism to the production when real gang members began threatening the cast and crew. The most serious threat came when members of the Bloods gang targeted Ice Cube, specifically because they were upset about how their gang was being portrayed in the film, and they made it clear that they were not responsible if someone actually shot the rapper-turned-actor for showing them in a negative light. The tension arose from a particular scene in the movie where Ice Cube's character Doughboy, who is heavily implied to be associated with the Crips, shoots someone who is heavily implied to be a member of the Bloods. This fictional gang conflict on screen hit too close to home for real gang members who were watching the production unfold in their neighborhood. The Bloods members who made the threats were concerned that the movie would damage their reputation and make them look bad to the wider public. Director John Singleton and the production team took these threats seriously enough that they had to change at least one filming location to avoid potential violence. The gang member who issued the warning against Ice Cube made it clear that while he wasn't planning to hurt the actor himself, he couldn't guarantee that other members wouldn't take action if they felt their gang was being disrespected by the film. This real-world danger added an extra layer of tension to what was already a challenging shoot in a neighborhood where violence was a daily reality. The fact that Ice Cube was a former member of NWA, a rap group that had built their reputation on songs about gang life and street violence, made the situation even more complex. The threats showed just how seriously local gang members took their portrayal in popular culture and how the line between fictional storytelling and real-world consequences could become dangerously blurred when filming in authentic locations. Fact 5. The film crew needed a shield van. The dangers of filming Boyz in the Hood on location in South Central Los Angeles were so real that the production team had to take an extraordinary safety precaution that most movie sets would never need to consider. After experiencing threats and altercations with local gang members, the film crew made an official request to have a van parked directly behind them while they were shooting scenes, specifically to serve as protection in case an actual drive-by shooting occurred during filming. This wasn't just paranoia or an overabundance of caution. It was a practical response to the very real violence that was happening in the neighborhood where they were working. Director John Singleton later revealed in his DVD commentary that after one particular altercation on set, there was a genuine threat of gun violence from local gang members, which prompted the crew to take this unusual safety measure. The van was positioned strategically so that if gunfire erupted, the cast and crew would have immediate cover to dive behind. The need for a shield van highlights just how committed Singleton was to filming in authentic locations rather than on safer studio sets or in less dangerous neighborhoods. While many filmmakers might have chosen to recreate South Central on a soundstage or film in a different area entirely, Singleton insisted on shooting in the actual streets where these stories took place. This decision brought an undeniable authenticity to the film. But it also meant that the line between the fictional violence depicted in the movie and the real violence happening around them became uncomfortably thin. Cuba Gooding Jr. later confirmed that there were fistfights and threats on set every day during production, making the shield van a necessary piece of equipment rather than just an extra precaution. The fact that a major Hollywood production needed to plan for the possibility of actual gunfire while making a movie about gun violence shows just how accurately the film was capturing the reality of life in that community during the early 1990s. Fact 6. Audio had to be completely redubbed. The authenticity that John Singleton achieved by filming Boyz in the Hood in real South-Central Los Angeles locations came with an unexpected technical challenge that forced the production team to completely re-record most of the dialogue in post-production. The constant background noise of police helicopters patrolling the neighborhood and actual gunshots from real street violence made it impossible to capture clean audio during filming, turning what should have been straightforward dialogue scenes into a sound engineer's nightmare. Throughout the filming process, the crew found themselves constantly interrupted by the very sounds that the movie was trying to portray. Police helicopters were a regular presence in the area, flying overhead and searching for suspects or responding to crimes, and their rotor noise would drown out the actors' voices during crucial scenes. Even more disruptive were the genuine gunshots that would ring out from various parts of the neighborhood while cameras were rolling, making it impossible to use the original audio recordings. This meant that after principal photography wrapped, the actors had to return to a recording studio to perform their lines again in a process called Automated Dialogue Replacement, or ADR. They had to watch their filmed performances and match their lip movements while re-speaking all their dialogue in a controlled environment. This process is common for small portions of films when there are audio problems, but having to redo most of the dialogue due to real-world violence was highly unusual for a major Hollywood production. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved that they were making a movie about the sounds of urban violence, helicopters, sirens, and gunshots. And those exact same sounds were preventing them from capturing usable audio. Nia Long, who played Brandy in the film, later commented on how the set was only about 10 blocks from her house, but she couldn't walk there because it wouldn't have been safe. The audio problems became another reminder of just how real the dangers were in the community where they were telling this story. Fact 7. Singleton never told actors when gunshots fired. Director John Singleton took his commitment to authentic reactions so seriously that he deliberately kept his actors in the dark about when gunshots would go off during filming, a risky directing technique that nearly led to a serious accident involving Morris Chestnut. Singleton wanted the fear and surprise on his actors' faces to be completely genuine. So he would have gunfire erupt without warning during scenes, catching the cast completely off guard and capturing their real startled reactions on camera. This technique was most dramatically used during the pivotal scene where Ricky, played by Morris Chestnut, gets shot while trying to escape from rival gang members in an alley. The scene required Chestnut to run while carrying milk and lottery scratch-off tickets, and when the shotgun blast went off behind him, his reaction was completely authentic because he had no idea when it was coming. However, the surprise gunfire created a dangerous situation that the stunt coordinator had warned him about beforehand. Chestnut later revealed in interviews that the technical requirements of the scene were actually more nerve-wracking than the acting itself. The stunt coordinator had specifically told him to keep his head up while running because if he looked down, the explosive squibs that create the gunshot effects could potentially explode in his face. This meant that Chestnut had to focus on running in the correct position while not knowing when the loud gunshots would startle him, creating a perfect storm for potential injury. The combination of Singleton's surprise timing and the technical dangers of the scene nearly resulted in disaster when Chestnut's genuine shock at the gunfire almost caused him to stumble and fall directly into the path of a moving car that was part of the scene. The close call highlighted the thin line between getting authentic performances and putting actors in real danger, but Singleton's method ultimately contributed to some of the most believable and emotionally powerful moments in the film, where the terror on the actors' faces feels completely real because it was. Fact 8. Columbia offered 100-0 to not direct. When John Singleton first brought his script for Boyz in the Hood to Columbia Pictures, The studio executives loved the story, but had serious doubts about letting a 23-year-old film school graduate with no directing experience take control of what they saw as a potentially important project. Their solution was to offer Singleton $100,000 to simply walk away from the director's chair and let someone more experienced handle the filmmaking while he kept the writing credit and payment for his screenplay. This buyout offer represented a significant amount of money for a young screenwriter fresh out of USC Film School, especially in 1990 when that sum had considerably more purchasing power than it does today. Columbia's executives were following standard Hollywood practice of separating writing and directing responsibilities, particularly when dealing with first-time filmmakers. They wanted to pair Singleton's authentic script with a director who had proven experience managing budgets, schedules, and large film crews. However, Singleton refused the money and made it clear that he would not sell his script unless he was guaranteed the right to direct it himself. His reasoning was deeply personal and political. He felt that only someone who had actually lived the experiences depicted in the story could authentically bring it to the screen. Singleton later explained his position by saying he wasn't going to let somebody from Idaho or Encino direct this movie, emphasizing that the cultural authenticity of the project was more important to him than the financial security of a quick payday. The studio initially resisted, but Singleton held firm in his negotiations, refusing to budge on his demand to direct. His persistence paid off when Columbia eventually agreed to let him helm the project, though they kept the budget relatively modest at $6 million. This decision proved to be one of the smartest moves in the studio's history, as Singleton's personal connection to the material and his authentic perspective helped create a film that resonated with audiences and critics alike, ultimately earning over $57 million at the box office. Fact 9. Ice Cube brought Easy E-shirts for crack addicts. One of the most petty and brilliantly subtle acts of revenge in movie history happened right on the set of Boyz and the Hood, and most viewers never even noticed it. Ice Cube, who was still feuding with his former NWA bandmates after leaving the group in December 1989, brought a collection of Eazy-E merchandise to the film set and made sure that the actors playing crack addicts and other unsavory characters were wearing his former friends' shirts during their scenes. The bad blood between Ice Cube and Eazy-E had been building for months before filming began, stemming from a financial dispute that led to Ice Cube's departure from NWA. The tension was so thick that director John Singleton had originally wanted to cast other NWA members like Eazy-E, Dr. Dre, and MC Ren in the film alongside Ice Cube, but the ongoing feud made that impossible. Instead of letting the situation go, Ice Cube decided to use his movie role as an opportunity for some creative payback. In one particularly memorable scene, a crack addict wearing an Eazy-E shirt runs up and tries to steal a gold chain from one of the characters, but he gets caught and swiftly punished for his attempted theft. The visual of Eazy-E's face and name being associated with a desperate drug addict was Ice Cube's way of getting the last laugh in their public dispute, and director Singleton was happy to let the inside joke play out on camera. The real Eazy-E eventually caught wind of this subtle insult when the movie was released, and he was not amused by Ice Cube's tactics. In an interview with Spin magazine, Eazy-E dismissed the entire film as resembling a Monday after-school special with cursing, and he claimed that Ice Cube was only being used by the filmmakers to help sell tickets. This public dismissal showed that the rivalry between the former bandmates was still very much alive, and Ice Cube's wardrobe choice had definitely hit its intended target. Fact 10. The movie accidentally boosted beer sales. Boyz n the Hood created an unexpected marketing phenomenon that no one saw coming when scenes showing characters drinking 40-ounce bottles of malt liquor caused a massive spike in sales that caught distributors completely off guard. The film's realistic portrayal of young men in south-central Los Angeles drinking St. Ides malt liquor as part of their daily routine resonated so strongly with audiences that it triggered a buying frenzy that forced at least one Los Angeles-based distributor to start rationing his inventory just to keep up with sudden demand. The power of this unintentional product placement demonstrated how deeply the film connected with viewers who saw their own experiences reflected on the big screen. When audiences watched Ice Cube's character Doughboy and his friends casually drinking 40-ounce bottles while hanging out in the neighborhood, It wasn't just a prop choice. It was an authentic detail that John Singleton included because that's what people in that community actually drank. The scenes weren't meant to promote alcohol consumption, but rather to show the reality of life in the hood as accurately as possible. Hip-hop culture had a long and complicated relationship with alcohol companies during this period, and the connection between malt liquor brands and urban communities was already well established before the movie came out. However, seeing these products featured so prominently in a major Hollywood film gave them a level of mainstream exposure that transformed casual brand recognition into active consumer demand. The 40-ounce bottles became almost like a symbol of authenticity, representing the real experiences that the movie was portraying. Ice Cube himself later became a paid spokesperson for St. Ides, capitalizing on the connection that audiences had made between him and the brand through his role in the film. However, this partnership eventually ended when the malt liquor company came under public pressure for controversial advertising campaigns that critics said were specifically targeting African American communities in ways that promoted harmful drinking habits. Fact 11. Stand By Me inspired key scenes. While Boyz n the Hood deals with completely different subject matter than the 1986 coming-of-age film Stand By Me, John Singleton drew direct inspiration from Rob Reiner's movie when crafting two of his most memorable scenes. Singleton has openly acknowledged that the early scene where young Trey and his friends go to look at a dead body in an alley was directly influenced by the central plot of Stand By Me, where four boys take a journey to find a dead body in the woods. The connection between these two films might seem unlikely at first glance, since Stand By Me follows white middle-class kids in 1950s Oregon, while Boyz n the Hood depicts black urban youth in 1980s Los Angeles, but both movies share the common theme of childhood innocence being lost through encounters with death and violence. Singleton recognized that the fascination children have with mortality crosses all cultural and racial boundaries, and he wanted to show how kids in South Central dealt with the same morbid curiosity that drives the characters in Stephen King's original story. The influence of Stand By Me also extends to the very end of Boyz n the Hood, where Singleton borrowed the technique of having the main character fade away from the screen as the credits roll. In Stand By Me, the adult narrator reflects on his childhood friends, while the young version of his character slowly disappears from view, creating a powerful sense of time passing and childhood ending. Singleton used this same visual technique with Ice Cube's character Doughboy, who fades out of the final scene as the audience learns through text that he was murdered just 2 weeks after the events we've just witnessed. This borrowing of cinematic techniques shows how Singleton was influenced by successful storytelling methods from other films while adapting them to tell his own very different story. The fact that he could take elements from a nostalgic period piece about small-town America and make them work in a gritty urban drama demonstrates his skill as a filmmaker, and his understanding of universal human experiences transcend specific cultural settings. Fact 12. Singleton has a secret cameo. Director John Singleton made a brief but memorable appearance in his own film that most viewers completely miss during their first viewing of Boyz n the Hood. He shows up as a postal worker wearing a full mailman uniform, complete with the official cap and sunglasses, who arrives to deliver letters to the Baker family home just as Doughboy and Ricky are having an intense argument on the front lawn. The cameo happens during one of the film's more dramatic family moments, when the two brothers are engaged in a heated confrontation that highlights their completely different personalities and life paths. While Ice Cube and Morris Chestnut are delivering emotionally charged dialogue as the feuding siblings, Singleton walks calmly through the scene in his postal uniform, hands the mail directly to their mother Brenda, and then disappears from the movie just as quietly as he appeared. This type of director cameo was already a well-established tradition in Hollywood by 1991, with filmmakers like Alfred Hitchcock famous for making brief appearances in their own movies. However, Singleton's choice to appear as a mailman was particularly fitting for a film that was so deeply rooted in the authentic details of neighborhood life. Having the mail delivered during a family dispute was exactly the kind of everyday interruption that would happen in real life, making his cameo feel natural rather than forced or attention-grabbing. The timing of the scene also adds an extra layer of meaning to Singleton's appearance, since mail delivery represents a connection to the outside world and potentially better opportunities beyond the immediate neighborhood. In a film where characters are often trapped by their circumstances and limited options, the mailman becomes a subtle symbol of communication and possibility, even if that connection to the broader world is just a brief interruption in the ongoing cycle of family conflict and neighborhood drama. Singleton kept his appearance low-key enough that many viewers never realize they're seeing the director himself, making it a true hidden Easter egg for observant fans. Fact 13. The original title was Summer of '84. The film that would eventually become Boyz in the Hood started life with a completely different title that gives no hint of the iconic name it would eventually carry. When John Singleton was applying to film school at USC, one of the requirements on the application form asked prospective students to describe 3 ideas for films they might want to make, and one of the concepts he submitted was called Summer of '84. This original title reflected the specific time period that Singleton wanted to explore in his story, focusing on a particular summer in the mid-1980s when the crack epidemic and gang violence were reaching new levels in south-central Los Angeles. The year 1984 was significant because it marked a turning point in many urban communities when the problems that had been building for years began to reach a crisis level that would define the rest of the decade. As Singleton developed the script further during his time in film school, the story evolved and expanded beyond just that single summer, eventually covering a longer time period that showed the characters growing from children into young adults. This broader scope meant that the original title no longer captured the full scope of what the movie had become, and Singleton began looking for something that better represented the themes and tone of his story. The transformation from Summer of '84 to Boyz in the Hood represented more than just a name change. It reflected how the project had grown from a specific time-based story into something that captured the ongoing reality of life in urban America. The final title was inspired by the NWA song of the same name, which Ice Cube had written and which perfectly captured the street-level perspective that Singleton wanted to bring to his film. The evolution of the title also shows how Singleton's vision became more focused on the characters themselves rather than just the historical moment they were living through, making the story feel more universal and timeless while still being rooted in the specific experiences of South Central Los Angeles. Fact 14. Theater violence caused 21 theaters to pull the film. The opening weekend of Boyz in the Hood became a tragic, real-world example of the very violence the film was trying to address when gang-related incidents at movie theaters across the country resulted in 2 people being killed and more than 30 others injured during screenings. The violence was so widespread and serious that 21 theaters made the decision to pull the film from their schedules entirely, fearing that continued showings would put their customers and staff at risk. The problems began on the very first night, when rival gang members attending the same screenings recognized each other in theater lobbies and parking lots, leading to confrontations that quickly escalated into serious violence. In some cases, the movie itself seemed to inflame existing tensions between groups, as audiences identified with different characters and gangs on screen, turning what should have been entertainment into a flashpoint for real-world conflicts that had nothing to do with the film's actual message. Director John Singleton was devastated by these incidents because they represented the exact opposite of what he had hoped to accomplish with his movie. The film was intended to show the destructive consequences of gang violence and encourage young people to make better choices, but instead, it was inadvertently providing a gathering place where the very problems it depicted could play out in real life. Singleton later revealed that he had personally witnessed a potential conflict between Crips and Bloods at one screening and had tried to have security intervene before violence erupted. The media coverage of the theater incidents led to intense debate about whether the film should continue to be shown at all, with some critics arguing that any movie that inspired real violence should be removed from theaters immediately. However, Singleton and Columbia Pictures defended the film, with the director calling the decision to pull screenings artistic racism and pointing out that violence happens at many different types of events, but films with predominantly black casts seem to face much harsher scrutiny and consequences when incidents occurred at their screenings. Fact 15. It made more money per screen than Terminator 2. In the summer of 1991, there was no question which movie dominated the box office when Terminator 2: Judgment Day went head-to-head with Boyz in the Hood during their theatrical releases. The big-budget science fiction sequel starring Arnold Schwarzenegger raked in nearly $205 million domestically, completely dwarfing the $58 million that John Singleton's drama managed to earn. But these raw numbers don't tell the whole story about which film was actually the more impressive financial success. The real revelation comes when you look at the production budgets and the per-screen earnings that each movie generated during their runs. Terminator 2 cost a massive $102 million to produce, which meant that despite its enormous box office take, the film only earned about twice what it cost to make. Meanwhile, Boyz in the Hood was made for just $6 million, which meant that its $58 million gross represented nearly 10 times its production budget, making it one of the most profitable films of the year in terms of return on investment. Even more impressive was how much money each film made per individual theater screen. While Terminator 2 had the advantage of a much wider release across thousands of theaters nationwide, Boyz in the Hood was shown in far fewer locations but generated higher earnings per screen than the blockbuster sequel. This meant that on average, each theater showing Singleton's film was bringing in more revenue per screening than theaters showing the heavily promoted Arnold Schwarzenegger vehicle. The per-screen success of Boyz in the Hood proved that audiences were hungry for authentic stories that reflected their own experiences, and that a well-made film with a modest budget could compete financially with the biggest Hollywood productions. The numbers also demonstrated that Columbia Pictures had made an incredibly smart investment when they decided to greenlight Singleton's project, turning a relatively small financial risk into one of the most profitable films in their catalog that year.